November 19th, 2004. That was the day the NBA changed forever. Almost 20 years ago, a dust-up between the Pacers and Pistons ended in all-out violence. Following this, the NBA knew they had to do a complete rebrand. First, by starting to implement stricter rules both on and off the court. Any taunting or physical altercations were met with flagrant fouls and technical fouls. Even any indication of violence, like elbowing and trash talk, could lead to technical fouls. The NBA couldn't take any more chances. Off the court, they implemented dress codes for the players, like no jerseys, jeans, do-rags, and large jewelry. These fashion pieces are commonly associated with hip-hop culture. For the most part, the NBA responded accordingly well, but there's still one thing that lingers: reputation. For some context, Malice at the Palace took place in Auburn Hills, Michigan, which is in the suburbs and considered one of the safer regions in Michigan. In fact, it ranked 307 on the Michigan Crime Index by city. Still, this has not stopped fans from stereotyping Detroit as a team full of dirty and aggressive players. Sure, Isaiah Stewart and LeBron got into an altercation last year, but no fans were involved and no one got hurt. Or how about when Patrick Beverley shoved Chris Paul? Do you remember when Joel Embiid and Montrezl Harrell got into it? Altercations like this can happen to any team. That brings me to what happened a few weeks ago, between the Pistons and the Magic. Mo Wagner shoved Killian Hayes as he was chasing a loose ball. This only prompted Hayes to answer back with a forearm strike from hell to the back of Wagner's head. Hayes only got suspended for 3 games, while Wagner got 2 games. There were other players that got 1-game suspensions for leaving the bench also. But what really stood out to me was the suspension cost for the players. Killian Hayes will lose out on $120,781. Hayes makes $5,837,760 a year. You divide those numbers, and Hayes is only losing 2% of his total salary. On the other hand, Wagner is only losing 1.4% of his total salary. For starting one of the worst things we can possibly start during an NBA game, this fine of $120,781 is definitely not enough. These players know the NBA won't do anything catastrophic, so even if they get into a little scuffle, the worst they get is a fine or they just get suspended for a few games. So they will continue to ignore the consequences. Ultimately, this player mindset is damaging the NBA. Do you notice anything about NBA commercials and sponsors? They're all aimed at middle-class families. Their sponsors like Kia, Hotel.com, and Beats by Dre all sell products that only a particular class can afford. This style of branding has made the NBA what it is today. But to get here, the NBA also had to ban do-rags, headbands with upside-down logos, and ninja-style headbands to maintain the sort of professionalism. The league didn't want to be perceived as thugs and lose out on money. They were very focused on building a family-friendly brand. That's how they get all these deals and sponsorships to pay their players in the first place. Without this, you wouldn't see NBA players having the financial freedom to shelf out millions on mansions and cars. It took a lot of effort and policy change for the NBA to transition to what it is today, but all of that is at risk. Fights like the one we saw between the Magic and Pistons, heck, fights we've seen in recent years have all undermined the NBA in some way. The league has to find a way to squash these altercations. NBA players aren't just athletes playing for an organization. In most cases, fans look up to them, especially younger fans. That's why when NBA players do anything that resembles thug behavior, like Charles Barkley spitting on a fan, Dennis Rodman kicking a reporter in the nuts, or Killian Hayes punching another player, the media and fans are quick to criticize this behavior. They know it's not good for the brand. Not only does this damage the brand of the NBA, but they are indirectly telling these kids that this is okay to do. Thus, the NBA would lose viewership, and that is certainly not what the NBA wants right now. NBA TV viewership hasn't even fully recovered since the pandemic. The league has admitted to losing out on $1.5 billion through a combination of factors like the pandemic, the cancellation of 171 regular season games, the spending of $200 million to operate a bubble in Orlando, and a rift with China that saw NBA games banned from television. So the last thing the NBA needs right now is a decline in viewership and revenue.
That's sending it downwards.
Over the past few years, player empowerment has taken over the NBA. And this isn't a bad thing at all, but some of these players take this whole player empowerment thing to a whole nother level. Take a look at these 4 numbers. Now if I told you that these were the fine amounts handed out by the NBA the past 4 years, which year would you guess got this number? It was the 2021-22 NBA season. But you may be asking yourself, how did these fines accumulate to this much? You have 2 players to blame for that, and that is Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving. What happened in the 2021-22 season is truly unprecedented. Both Simmons and Irving got fined for every game they sat out. Simmons sat out for 47 games, and each game cost him $360,305. That runs his total fine up to $16,934,335. Irving missed 36 games, and each game cost him $381,181. His fine came to $13,722,516. So that means Kyrie and Ben made up 85% of all fines that year. This is a cost of so-called player empowerment. Player empowerment at times can make NBA players feel like they don't have to abide by the rules, that they are above them. After all, in a perfect world, players put themselves first and should be able to complain about officiating or rip off NBA teams by signing massive contracts and not playing. But it's not a perfect world. When player empowerment is taken too far, the league and fans get the worst of it. Take Kawhi Leonard for example. The man is famous for load management, a term that's been thrown around a lot. Basically it means you sit out a game because you just don't feel like playing. And there's a huge problem with this concept. Fans go to games to see the superstars, not the role players. If the superstars aren't playing, they're not going to buy tickets, which means ticket sales go down. What about television? Less people will watch the game, which means decreased viewership. If those franchise players continue to sit out, those fans might watch other sports instead and forget about the NBA. It's all a slippery slope that the NBA is not ready for.